We are on the magic school bus today.
Yeah, and we haven't done any psychedelics.
Yeah, or I think the more appropriate thing for this would be like Black Magic Woman.
That's a great song.
Santana's phenomenal.
I like back in those days.
Yeah. When I can listen to that song over and over. What's another? Do you have any other magic puns?
I'm the Magic Man.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a magic song by
You got the Who?
Michael Jackson?
Well, there's one by Michael Jackson, the Who. I don't know if ELO did one.
Well, I think back then, too, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Back then, they did all... I didn't cut yours up if I was blasting you early with your headphones. I was like... I like to hear you without an echo.
Yeah,
so
that's
I
nice.
have to try to adjust it.
I don't want to hear your natural voice. I want to hear the digital one.
Digitally manufactured
through. But why does everyone sing about magic? Why is magic a thing? Why is Harry Potter like so?
Oh, people love.
People are hooked on magic.
Yes.
You know,
magic is like, and then they spell it differently too.
Yeah, M-A-G-I-K.
Then you have the David Copperfield, which is like illusion of hands. But yet they're still magicians.
Who's the guy that does the street magic? Always like kills himself on a fence. What's his name?
I know he was with Britney Spears.
Yeah, what's his name? Come on,
I would know his name.
Chris Angel.
Chris Angel. Yeah,
I'm like, what's that dude? He's always killing himself.
Douchey. Yeah.
I'm gonna hold my breath for 30 hours. Okay, dude. Good luck.
I wonder how many bodies he's gone through.
I have no idea.
He's figured out how to come back.
Yeah, he has come back.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Why don't you just purposely want to drown yourself? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's what was that movie with the two magic guys, and it was really, really good, and it had Christian Bell. And
I love that movie.
Remember that? And
I don't want to.
And they were doing that. They were killing themselves.
But it was like back during Tesla's time.
Yes.
Yeah,
that was a great movie.
Oh, it's a phenomenal film. Why can't I remember? The Illusionist? No.
Yes, I think that's what it was called.
Something like that, right?
I think it was The Illusionist.
What an amazing film.
Yeah,
David Bowie was
trying to still figure out how he's doing it, but he was actually killing himself.
Yeah, because he was splitting himself dimensionally with Tesla's like big coil machine.
Yes, yeah, so good.
You'd be like creating.
I need to watch that
reality.
again.
I actually want to watch that right now.
Mm-hmm.
But why is it? Everyone's always worried about the physical magic.
Speaking of magic.
Yeah, speaking of magic. But it's the physical sense of it, right? People are like, ooh, physical magic. We're going to get this book to float. So we got a big book here.
How thick that is.
Yeah,
that's almost as thick as Alex's dick. I knew I could make you laugh.
You did a good job. I appreciate the compliment. The Golden Dawn, what that's really interesting.
The Golden Dung?
Yeah, Golden Dawn. No, it's
yeah.
not that book for the cows. This
is the 7th edition.
Yeah. Well, why do you have to have so many editions? Dude, how many times you got to rewrite something so huge?
This is this book. I used it instead of my kettlebell.
Sorry.
We made some mushroom coffee. Illegal or legal?
No, legal.
Legal.
Yeah, legal. Coffee. No psilocybin.
Yeah, and there's nothing. We put all different types of mushrooms. So we're
from chaga to turkey tail to reishi. Everything.
Then you got some nootropic.
Yeah, I don't. My brain is like exploding out of my skull. Yeah.
But I asked you about this book.
You did.
And then you brought it over and scared me.
Yeah, I did.
With how big it is.
I dropped it off like a threat.
When did you read this?
I read that book 2.5, maybe 3 years ago.
Oh, when you were 14?
Yeah, when I was 14. I wish I was, competent enough to do something like that. But it took me a very long time to get through it.
Oh, I can imagine. To me, that would probably take me a year.
I didn't realize, because what you're doing is you're talking about it's not a secret society, okay? You have the Freemasons and things of that nature, and everybody has their rituals, but it's like, hey, I'm going to give you all of school from preschool through college in one book.
Yes.
In a spiritual sense. And they're like, here you go, read it and, really integrate it with yourself. And then that's what I found in this piece of literature here. I actually bought that up on Mass Ave up in Boston. I saw it and I was like, oh, I have to get it. It was a really great bookstore up there. Bookstore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's next to a food place I used to like. It's called Life Alive.
So you just had like this little area you could go to, and it was awesome.
Oh, it was just absolutely fuego. Yeah, really enjoyed it. But this book, like I said, it took a very long time to get through, but there's an interesting history that comes with it. And the reason...
You just keep looking at the floor, people. We're actually looking at the book.
Yeah, we're looking at the book.
I always try to think of like the listeners that they're listening, or if they're watching this, like what are they looking at? Well, we had your dog here.
Yeah, the dog was here, and I was like looking at it. There was one. No one ever knows, what do they call it in filming, like the fifth wall or something like that.
Yeah,
Don't break the fifth wall. Don't look at the camera. But anyway, the Golden Dawn. I had dipped into it because I study Hebrew for fun, and I realized that there's a lot of mysticism, as you would call it, around the Hebrew language.
Yes.
And what I had found through my research is that the Golden Dawn was like the cream of the crop for trying to understand like how the Hebrew language actually plays into a lot of, Kabbalistic mysticism that tied in many, many old religions.
Right.
So because I'm always searching for a golden thread. No
Yes.
pun intended that it's the Golden Dawn. And so I was like, okay, it's worth a read. I'll go through it. And I did. And so what I found myself is like, wow, there is actually some pretty good non-dogmatic stuff in here.
Yes.
Because when you go into the Freemasons require you to believe in a certain deity, right? I went to quite a few different Freemason things, even like Scottish Rite groups and stuff up in Boston where it's like, it's huge.
It's huge, right?
And I'm like, these guys are, first of all, tools. Like, what are you guys doing? This is like, none of this is cool.
We're smoking cigar, drinking scotch.
That's all they do, right? And they say, oh, we got these secrets, we got this. It's like, no, you really don't really know much. I'm sure there's a small group of you that have some deeper traditions
Right.
that take it extremely seriously. But end all be all is like, just like, a group for a bunch of kids to come play. That's what it felt like. And they do some, albeit
Get away, get out of the house, get away from their wife.
But do you really know like what you're saying?
Right.
And so when I look
at male it's male
it's
dominated.
completely male dominated. You wouldn't believe
Can a female come in there?
in certain parts of it. I know there's a different part of the Freemasons for it, but they are so chauvinistic.
Yeah.
It's almost
I could
disgusting.
imagine. Yeah.
No, it's actually, frankly, it's very disgusting, right? And I'm just like, these are not people I want to align with. And they pride themselves on like, oh, secretive, like the whole like pop culture around it, kind of like the sex appeal being a Freemason. There's nothing sexy about it.
Like you have to do a certain handshake. And I know a lot of our, but during, and not to get into Freemasonry, but during the American Revolution where they used it as a format to keep secrets about the revolution.
Sure.
I mean, that's what it was used mostly. And then everybody was in it. So it's kind of a club, I guess.
And what the problem is with the clubs is it's the knower and what did you say earlier?
Yeah, the knower and the known.
Yeah, it's like the knower and the known, and it immediately creates a hierarchy. And that was like the first issue that I noticed is that these people, these individuals, thought that they were better than the rest of society because they're a part of this collective group. And it's like, buddy, do you know how many secret societies have come and gone? And they all think they're better, and they all think that, doing a certain ritual or like, some bloodbath. Oh, by the way, speaking of rituals, when you sneeze?
Yes.
So the other day I sneezed and someone's like, bless you. I'm like, I don't really need you to bless me. And because I'm like, frankly, I don't even know where that comes from.
Yeah, where does it
I'm
come
like, what's
from?
the etymology of it, right? So it's actually Proto-Germanic. And it's called bloodeth. And bloodeth is a pagan ritual, blood ritual on an altar. So when you're actually blessing something, you have an altar and you're actually pouring animal blood all over it. Don't bless me.
Yeah.
Why would the church adopt something so insane?
They dropped a lot of.
No, I know that.
That's what.
But if I think about it, it's like, stop blessing me. And everyone's going around like saying it. But the thing is, I wish people like figured out what they were saying.
Well, I mean, like Santa Claus, all that stuff. Judeo-Christian. There's the hummingbird.
He's back. He loves it when we podcast.
Yes, he does.
Or he, she. I don't know what it. I don't care.
whatever.
It's androgynous.
Yeah. It's just an alignment of the path.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of like what I've been calling it here lately. I'm like my journey, my path, and where I'm at, and then the universe just gives you creation. I like that terminology that you use. It just gives you signs that say, "Hey, good job, you."
Yeah. No, it's
like, hey,
it's constantly
positive.
Nature constantly reminds you.
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And you've had I just like to touch on this because I compliment you to other people.
Oh, thank you.
I'm not trying to float you up or build your ego.
I do the same with you, though. I always tell people how
in all
your ancient wisdom.
Yeah, I just like learning. I'm not obsessed with learning. I just like to know, and I want to apply it to see if there's any wisdom in it. But when I first met you,
yes,
you're interested. I could tell you wanted to learn things,
right?
And you do a very good job of asking questions. And what I've realized over time is that it's not even a know or known situation. It's a perfect teach, learn, learn, teach, where you've actually elevated yourself quite substantially in your consciousness and your perspective, how you view the world, how you take care of yourself. There's a better holistic picture of Jason than the one I originally knew. And you've washed away, bad habits, all these other things. And when I speak to people, I'm like, this gentleman, regardless of age, is willing to actually learn, actually to say like, oh, I've come to a realization and I'm willing to put it in action.
Right.
You've actually built up the will within yourself to make a dramatic positive change in your life and everyone around you.
Well, I think, I mean, with your help, but I don't know where my phone's at. I wanted to read a text because I got it today and it was really interesting.
Where's the phone?
Let me grab it because
take a 2-second pause because it's interesting because this is building like people are like, oh, what's going to happen?
Oh, Jason's gone.
Yeah, I'm gonna, and that's it. I compliment him and he leaves the show. I'm gonna sit here quietly so it builds up a little bit of like angst.
I can talk from like a distance.
Yeah, you talk from a distance. Like I know it's gonna pick it up.
It will pick it up.
Hush whispers from Jason in the corner. Yeah, in our bootleg studios.
In the pit of the Sandia Mountains.
Yeah, in the pit of the... Hey, I'm interesting you said that. I had a dream about Sandia Mountains.
Was there aliens?
No, it's just like really strange. I'm always dreaming about aliens. I can't.
No, but I mean, isn't there like in this backside of the Sandia Mountains, isn't there like a big nuclear facility or something?
Yeah, well,
in the mountains?
In the mountain because Sandia Labs is built under it. But anyway, I had like a dream about like a cave. I don't want to get into the dreams. Too sidetracked. We'll do it at the end of the episode. So what about the text?
No, this was interesting. Oh, that was a funny one.
Yeah.
Our friend sent. I want to read this because it's so good.
I love things that are good. I think the listeners want to hear things that are good too.
So I was talking to someone last night, and she said this. Funny you asked. I stayed up until 4 a.m. and was in and out of sleep. I woke up when you texted me this morning, LOL. She said, well, I stayed up because I was still pretty wired from anxiety, but also I felt motivated, especially after talking to you. And then she said, I applied to a couple jobs and I'm looking for more jobs. But then she talks about clarity and feeling clarity. And then I said, so thank you. I appreciate the kind words. I like when I motivate people to be better. That's my mission, but that's something, and the word motivate and all that is like, business terminology. But
I think
if my whole philosophy that I've developed,
yeah,
the teach learn has helped a lot. I talked about that the other day on my other podcast, but for me, it's like whether you leave this life for this world, the physical world that we look at, or you are with other people. I want people, whether I have a 30-second interaction with you or whether I have 30-year interaction with you, I want you to feel, or I want you to know, like your soul to resonate that I provided a ton of value to you and that you're a better person because I interacted with you.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And that has become, over this year, that has become my mission.
And I'm glad you said that because
to the point of so-called, if you want to say sacrifice, which it's really not, but that's an illusion.
It is an illusion. But in the group meditation I was doing last night, somebody had asked me after the fact. They're like, oh, you learn from the inside out, right? And I'm like, yeah, you do, but don't forget that you also learn from the outside in. There's a lot of self-reflective learning that happens.
Right.
But you also have to take external material experiences, like interacting with somebody,
right,
to balance that out.
Negative or positive.
Yeah, you have to have, there's always a unification approach, right? And there's always that law of opposites. And you have to have both of these things together, right? Because that creates a hyper oneness. We talked about in the previous episode. Right. But that's what you're saying is that interaction, you're helping fill that other positive half that people need for their actual development. So even if they don't recognize it, right, just like the emotion you might have left them with.
Yeah, or the honesty, this person was talking about being an accountant, but then they're super creative and they want to, get into art and stuff like that. And that's where they feel most alive and passionate. They can stay up all night and do, their black and white photography and stuff like that. And I was like, why are you doing numbers?
Yeah.
Now some people love numbers and they love math and it gets them into that, and they love helping businesses by balancing their books, and that can be, and I know we need to get into the Golden Dawn, and I want you to talk about this real quick because I think this is so important. This could almost be a little mini podcast. You only have one body now.
Yeah.
It's not like cars where we can trade them in and out every 3 years. We have this one, meat suit. Until we get another one. I love that. I know. Term. That's why I was waiting to use it. And then we're doing something that we absolutely hate. It's like, and that's something this year that I've realized too. My job is to provide a ton of value in any interaction that I have. And then number 2 is to get myself to the point of, zero debt like I did.
Right.
To get myself to the point to where I can have the utmost freedom. Mm-hmm. Because providing value to others and to the world, like trying not to have a big carbon footprint and all that stuff, is important to me.
Yeah.
I don't want to go chop that tree down. I have no desire to do
I like that tree. You better not.
I love that tree.
Where's the hummingbird going to
sit? Exactly. And then also I want to do that to others, to animals, to plants, to anything that's living.
Yeah.
I want to provide a ton of value. But it's more than that. It's the idea of me when I leave this meat suit that there's been that spread across, you know what I mean? Because my higher self, explain all that.
You've, Jason, you found a deep love for life.
That's what it's called, deep love for life. I like
because you've started to integrate yourself with everything that happens around you. You start to recognize your own cause and effects on this world and nature and individuals. And so that causes you to always check your thoughts. Is this positive?
Like
is
self-awareness.
Yeah. Is it neutral? Is it an equalized thought that I just had? You know, because you know that creates a benefit. We're in a closed system right here.
Right.
And if I have an opportunity to use this instrument, this meat suit, well, I should do that. But your love for everything, your love for life allows for a proper integration of all these experiences, internal and external. And then that's what you're finding. And then when you're doing that and you say, you know, I'm going to leave, and, you know, you're speaking to a better path of what your higher self might be, right? Your spirit. And in doing so, that allows you to flourish and evolve at a much faster rate to actually use this thing properly, your time properly that you have. And I think you're a testament to show that people can, with enough will, change their perspective and truly do something really beneficial and align with their passions. And in doing so, it allows them to create a lot more, what do you call it? Value, you know, for not only themselves, but everything else around them.
But to value their time enough, that they're willing to give up, if you would call it give up. There should be a different word for that. But like, there's so many people that are listening to this that are in the wrong job.
Yeah, a lot of them.
And they're spending 8-10 hour days doing something that they absolutely hate.
Well, they squander a passion, and they squander their ability to truly love, you know, everything that is around them, even themselves, because their focus is on retooling themselves or putting themselves into some sort of box or measurement to work for something that truly that's just like not something they want to do.
Yeah, it's like we were talking with Tartle, you know, tartle.co. You can sign up for that.
Yeah, thank you.
But we were talking about Turkey and Istanbul, and we're doing, you know, Google ads to them. And, you know, like I told you, it's like, I would love to, you know, boots on the ground, be there, you know, and go there for 2 or 3 months. I want to free myself. I'll rent a bike for 2 or 3 months. But I'll walk. I don't want to get to the level. Like I've bought houses and all that. I'm not going to buy a house ever again.
No,
you know, I don't want any responsibility materialistically to where I can't within 30 minutes be somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not that I would, you know, I'm not saying like, what was that movie with Robert De Niro where there was a movie, and I always remember this. He said he was like a gangster dude. Of course, he always played that. And he's like, kid, let me tell you, always have you need to leave in 5 minutes. Always be able to, and he always kept like clothes and stuff in the back of his trunk.
A go bag.
Gun. Yeah, he was always like ready to go, you know, pistol and all that. And not that it's that level, but I just want the freedom to be able to, and I will have that in my life because I know that my alignment is right.
Yeah, that freedom of choice is you're not being hypocritical with your thinking and your actions.
Yeah.
Both of them match themselves perfectly.
But if I wanted to study Muay Thai boxing and go to Thailand for 6 months,
you could do that.
I could do that. And you can, you know, you don't need to make 10, 15, 20 grand a month. You can live on 3 or 5, and you don't have to live in the United States.
You just have to unchain yourself from a lot of material things. It's not to say that, you know, completely bash the material life. You're in a material world.
Right.
So you have to use some material things to survive, right?
Material world. Material girl.
Again, everything is about that balance, right? And you've learned very well how to find that balance.
So let me ask you this, because I want everybody to know this, because you just recently got engaged.
Yeah.
So we talked about that a little bit, and I think that's awesome because you guys are like, you know that you're in perfect alignment with her. Yeah. And she also puts up with your bullshit, I would imagine. So.
She puts up with a lot of my bullshit. And there's a lot of it, you know? There's the sign language for bullshit.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So being in alignment, whenever I'm single, you know, I haven't met anybody that I want to, you know, make that thing like you did, and that would take time to get to know somebody.
It does.
Now you have a responsibility with her. How does that cause and effect and what we're talking about happen when there are two people now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, how does it change your perspective now?
So her and I, Amanda and I, our perspectives haven't changed. So this is something that was like a natural occurrence for us. It was bound to happen because we just knew who we were and, who we are together.
Yeah.
And we have a very learned relationship from one another. I learn a lot from her and she learns a lot from me, and we both keep each other in perfect check.
And you guys like literally hang out together almost 7 days a week.
We are with each other.
Like people would.
I'm not joking.
No, most people could
24/7.
I'm surprised. She seems like, because she seems very like, because she was talking about her being real athletic and real competitive and all that. It just seems like her personality would be like wanting to be independent. She seems like she's maybe I'm wrong.
No.
My perception of her is she would be fine.
Here's where you're
4 or 5
wrong.
hours being independent, and wanting a break from you.
Here's where the misnomer is.
Am I getting too personal? I'm sorry.
No, not at all. No, I give her that independence all the time. She has every choice to do whatever she wants, and she knows I'll respect that regardless.
Right.
She can always make that choice. But the thing is, I don't have any, pressure on her. My personality doesn't make demands of her all the time. I'm just, I'm there with her. I'm there completely, always in support. And I'm not being overbearing or just like breathing over her.
Because you're working at home. She works at home.
Yeah. We're both, together, in this, spiritual union, understanding our relationship with one another. And we really elevate one another. And through that recognition and an appreciation of each other's free will, there's no issue with us being together all the time. There's no annoyances or anything of that nature.
To me, I think you just gave the definition of love.
That's what it feels like. I really absolutely understand who this person is.
Respect another person's free will.
Yeah. I really understand who she is, and in doing so, I'm allowed to respect her free will and her wishes.
I like that. That's really good. That's really good. We need to add that, and we're going to do a whole show, not today, but we're going to do a whole show on the affirmations. Yeah, I think that you created. And I'm fortunate that I've gone through a journey of searching and having conscious thoughts that have led me to aligning with that sort of person, and that's who she is. And other people, they don't have that alignment, and she's gone through that journey too, and it's not a miracle. There's no such thing as a miracle. Right. It was just the cause and effect of the choices both of us have made in our lives have brought us together. But one thing, and we're going to have to get into this, but we're not doing total episodes, so we have a little bit of time. I hope you have some time. Yeah, you have time. Because I really like this. And maybe you could speak to this real quick, is people come and go in your life and it's for a reason always. Always. Yeah. I'm okay. And whether she stays in your life till you're, 100, or she's like, I gotta get the hell away from this guy. Yeah. Or whatever. It's her free will. Mm-hmm. But we've talked about that and you're 100% behind all that. But, when people interact in your life, whether it's perceived to be bad or good, what negative or positive, I want you to speak to this, Alex, because I think this is so good. Because you've shared this with me and it's helped me out tremendously, is why they come into your life and then why they leave. Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. So like all experiences, right? We are here to learn and evolve. Yes. So when someone comes into your life and it might not make much sense at first to you because you're not really aware of it. And only until the end, when that person or that experience has ended, do you realize like, oh, now I understand why I had that experience. Mm. But what was the point of it, right? Yes. The point of it was that this person came in to teach you something. And you made a lot of choices to align with that person so that you could garner that experience. A deep part of your subconscious and your will is driven to ask for that experience. I love that, yeah. And now this experience will bring itself back again and again and again if you're not learning from it. If you're not learning what has to be learned. You're like, why do so many negative people keep coming into my life? Why does this negative occurrence keep happening? It's because your conscious thoughts are driving you that way. You're not actually learning what needs to be learned, right? Negative or positive. Mm. And so if it happens once and you feel like, wow, maybe it's becoming more difficult over time, maybe the energy is becoming a lot stronger, is because you're asking for it. Your conscious will is driving you for those higher energies because you want to evolve faster. But you want to know more and experience. But it's polarity. People attract like attracts like. Yeah. Like anger begets anger and happiness begets happiness. So if you have issues with anger, you're going to be attracted to a person that has anger. Right. And until you actually learn from that attraction. Yes. And you integrate it and then move beyond it. Like, oh, I've learned from this. I understand what this anger is doing.
even though it's a very strong energy. I get it. Now I don't have to interact with that because my consciousness, I'm making a conscious effort to look towards new causes and effects, new choices.
And as you become more self-aware and as you realize that, then these relationships that you feel that you're in, well, whether it's a mom, whether it's, a partner, whatever it may be in your life, it is okay to disseminate from that. It's okay to say, this no longer in my growth and in my self-awareness, this no longer serves me.
Yeah, and you don't have to...
It's not cruel or mean.
It's not cruel. It's just we're here to learn and evolve. And if you're doing things that are creating a disevolution, things that regress, or that, split things apart that are non-unifying, don't do it. Don't follow it.
Yes.
Understand that that's not the best path for you.
And you're releasing that other person to follow their journey.
That's correct. Someone asked me again last night during the group meditation, after the fact, no one's asking me during the meditations. They're like, well, what happens when there's something, negative that's occurring? I was like, you have to understand here, you need to be thankful for all experience.
Yes. Yes.
You have to be thankful for it, right? And that gratitude is love, because what you realize that negative or positive, by thanking it and understanding that experience allows you to neutrally learn from it. And in doing so, that is a very straight path to evolution. And sort of like, oh, I should avoid this, or like, what is it about it? And I'm like, no, even though it might feel very negative, emotionally, whatever it might be, thank it for what it is. Disseminate that negative energy that you don't want to align with. And by thanking it, you're integrating with a higher energy, a better, more loving path. So you can actually change the resonance of those conscious thoughts and you can put yourself in that direction. So that means everything.
Yes.
Is a positive lesson learned.
The negative,
even
you
if
gotta have it.
Even if it's a negative thing bashing you, it's a positive lesson learned because you're understanding how to integrate it properly.
But it's so funny because that's, and I know Nietzsche and a lot of them, I've been reading a lot of him, but he talked about that. It's like, unfortunately, that's the best way we learn is in negative situations. There's something that happens in that time of suffering and grit and, all those things. That's when we seem to say, because he said, let me do an exercise. And would you rather live in a perfect world where there was no negative? What would you learn the most in? Would you learn the most in if you eliminated all the negative things out of your life?
You wouldn't learn
Perceived
anything.
negative.
There wouldn't be anything.
And
learned.
all you did was just have a positive life. Or if I took the positive way and the negative, which way would you have learned the most? And he's like, 100% of people are going to say, I learned the most in the perceived. I like to use the word perceived, in the perceived negative.
Yes. No, and that's correct because it's that perceived negative. If you don't have both, remember I talked about a law of opposites? Those positive and negative poles? Yes. You have to have both there because that's how you can determine the equalized path. But if you only have one, it's going to throw you off balance. Batteries don't work if they only have one pole on them, right? The positive.
Yes.
And it's a magnet won't work if it only has one pole.
Yes. It's George Campbell, the same thing with perceived for the journey.
Yeah, it's obvious.
You have to have a perceived villain.
You have to have those opposites, right? Think about a tree going into the ground. If the tree's the positive and the ground's the neutral, the grounding agent, if it's not there to hold the tree, then the tree's just going to fall over.
Weren't you talking about like in a forest, the other trees know that one's dying?
So what happens is the root system, you have mycelium down there. It's one of the largest organisms on Earth. Paul Stamets has talked about this, a couple other people, Terence McKenna, who wrote Fort of the Gods. When the trees are in there, this mycelium, this fungi, is sending, it's like a big brain. So if we're talking about like nootropics, it's like really juice in the trees. It allows them to actually communicate. Even if they're distance apart, the mycelium, that fungi in the soil, are actually sending those electrical transmissions back and forth. And it allows the trees to actually understand, oh, this one's sick. We need to send water this way, or do whatever's necessary.
That's the same as like the mitochondria in our body.
Yeah. Listen, there's no difference in nature.
Yes.
Right. And so that's something we have to understand, or like, your white blood cells. Once one recognizes it, we got to send the rest of the lot down there. There's an issue here. We got the COVID in the body, And so, we're all doing those things naturally. And so that's why, in a deeper appreciation, to come full circle back to it, when you can look at the laws of creation and have positive, neutral, equalized thoughts, you realize that what's happening with that hummingbird outside in the tree are all the same laws that affect you also. There's no differential. Or whales in the ocean, right? Or the mitochondria that's underneath the earth that you don't see, or everything else that's happening in space. And I also want to just remind people that nothing is a miracle. What happens is you just don't understand from your perspective yet. And you haven't really been paying attention to the cause and effect of all of your actions. Because if there was a miracle, then that would say that creation has something that sits outside of its own physical laws, and then the logic would cause it to fold in on itself.
It's also saying something external happened to me.
Yeah, it is saying something external happened to you, but really...
And that's not true.
No, you did that. You made that choice. It was an internal decision that led to an external outcome that you assume is a miracle because you can't explain it, but everything can be explained.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to be aware of it.
Yes, I love that.
And so we should probably lead ourselves into, now that we're 30 minutes in of a little intro, we should lead ourselves into the history of the Golden Dawn because, a little longer than most hours later. But when we talk about the Golden Dawn, you said it's really big in Hollywood right now.
Yeah, and then, with all the secret society and stuff like that.
But there's an interesting aspect of it that there's an internal teaching. It's a lot about, remove the dogmatism. Let's look at what can be done in a very teach, learn, teach format.
Yes.
And it says that all the tools you need are inside yourself. And that's a lot about what we've talked about.
Yes.
And, even using you as a fine example for it. And so I want to talk about the history and how this specific subgroup that has, very old traditions, not to say that all traditions are correct, but there is a lot of good stuff in it. Mm. And I don't want to talk about the flaws. I want to talk about the things that actually align properly. But how this subgroup has actually a lot of positive benefits that we can all learn from. And
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to dive into the history so we can
and interrupt me,
about it.
Please. So I just took this from Wikipedia. So Wikipedia I love Wikipedia. It's probably one of my favorite websites.
I like it.
But Wikipedia is, and you shared this on a Turtle episode, Wikipedia is, what do you call it when people get together and then they put information? We talked about Wikipedia on one of our Turtle ones,
but did.
Some of the information is not 100% accurate.
Correct.
And it may be, it's a perception of our localized consciousness.
Yeah, that's it. No, that's really what it is. And we've inked it down. Mm-hmm. And Wikipedia is a nice starting point for a lot of things.
Yes.
Okay. And if you can understand how to feed through the bullshit.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that will bash things on a lot of articles. And when I see things that get bashed a lot, I know that's something I should really look into, because why are you putting so much time and energy to shut this fucking thing down?
Yes.
Like, why can't you just let it be knowledge?
Yes.
Like, why are you trying to squander knowledge? And then that's when I need to do more research.
Yeah. And that's, it should open your little self-awareness pineal gland to say, I need to go into this.
Correct.
I need to study this. Why are the politicians so angry right now?
Yeah,
maybe I need to find out the reason why.
Yeah.
It's just, and we won't.
Why is everyone so against, Zithromax zinc and hydroxychloroquine?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Why are we so worried about patents and vaccines and drugs?
Why is it
money?
Why is the money such a driver? Why can't just let it be a generic,
So the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Hermetic.
That's what they called it. It started
from
this book.
I'm going to have to stop you right here. Sorry. Here's our first stop. Right. So Hermetic, that comes from Hermes Trismegistus. So back in quite a long time ago, the Egyptians called this guy Thoth, and the Greeks called him Hermes. It was this very learned individual that came down to this planet. No one really knows where this guy came from, but he was so well versed in so much spiritual knowledge that Hermes, people are like, we need to record what this guy's talking about. And he walked around, he gave talks. He never recorded anything himself.
So it's like what we would perceive as a Messiah, like a Jesus.
He was like this Messiah, but a completely non-dogmatic one. And so what happens is the priests of the times looked at this Hermes Trismegistus, right? And they're like, oh, this guy, we got to listen to what he has to say, because there's a lot of meat to this. And that's where the priests kind of took a lot of the knowledge and held it for themselves.
So that's where the Hermetic Orders come.
Yeah. So, and the Hermetic part talks, and that'll dip into the Kabbalism and all this other stuff. But Hermes is a very influential individual, thousands of years ago.
So the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which the author, and we'll get into the author a little bit too, was, this is what the book's from, the Golden Dawn. So because I want to address this and go through the history, because I want people to understand that this turned into a failed religion.
Yeah.
And people get involved, and they like to put labels and stuff. It was, the formation was 1887. Its extinction, 1903. So it didn't last very long.
No.
But then it got revived and then came through. And I know Israel brought it back with this book. And then now Hollywood's,
Israel's the guy's name. We're not talking about the country.
Its headquarters in London. Mm-hmm. And this is cool because it was, I can't say the Latin here, Ordo Hermetis Aurora, or something, but what is that? Aurora.
Yeah.
So I like that word.
Yeah.
So, and I know that
because they're talking about like the aurora, like the light.
the golden dawn. Yeah. That light, but Wikipedia and everybody labels this as a secret society.
It's not secret. We have a book
I know,
right here. There's nothing
exactly
secret about it.
It was a study and practice for the occult, metaphysics, and also paranormal.
Can we just explain what occult means?
Yes.
Everyone's like, occult, ooh, dude, I don't want to mess with that stuff.
Yeah.
The occult, if you look the word up, people, what it means is hidden. That's all it translates to. It just means hidden. It means unseen. It means I'm going to study the unseen.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead.
We've took it and said like, the guy that killed
Cult
all the
black
little
magic,
kids,
you know?
or the guy that killed all the little kids in Waco, Texas.
Yeah.
I know that's a real popular right now. On Netflix, they have that documentary on him. What was that? What was that church called down there? Do you remember that? Waco.
I don't even.
It was in Waco, Texas. Remember that?
Churches.
And then there was FBI went against.
Oh yeah. What was it called? The Vatican.
Yes, we can get into that too. So occult, metaphysics, and paranormal activities. It was known as a magical order, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It got huge in Great Britain. What we're going to focus on today is what it shared with us and taught us about spiritual development.
Mm-hmm.
Many present day concepts of ritual and magic, such as Wicca and the Lima.
Yeah. So Wicca. So it's like almost like witchcraft. So, it's almost like it blended into a certain type of pagan background. And, Wicca, was the guy in the U.S.? I forget what the gentleman's name was who started the Wicca religion. He had a great beard.
Yes. Yeah. We have pictures of him and stuff like that.
Yeah. You can look at the guy.
And we'll do a podcast on Wiccan.
And Wicca's like, I'm going to draw pentagrams everywhere and all this other stuff. And then people are like, ooh, pentagram, Satan. No, it's like, you really just don't really understand what the shapes mean. So, and that's what we're going to get into here. So keep going.
It's the largest, the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn is the largest single influence on 20th century Western occultism.
Mm-hmm.
3 founders, William Robert Woodman, William Wynne Westcott, and Samuel Liddell Mathers.
Yeah.
All 3 of them, which is what I love, they were all Freemasons. All 3 of them were, which probably was pretty common in that time in London.
Very.
Westcott appears to have been the initial driving force behind the establishment of the Golden Dawn. It was based on hierarchy and initiation because they copied the Masonic Lodge.
Correct. Third degree.
This is cool though. Stuff. And this is interesting that we brought in this. Women were admitted on equal basis with men.
Yeah. And this was a huge, diverting factor from the actual Freemasons at the time.
Right.
Like women, they could be a part of this.
The first order, and they had 3 different orders. And the first order taught esoteric philosophy based on the Hermetic Kabbalah and personal development through studying awareness of the 4 classical elements, which were astrology, Terra, divination, however you say that, and then geomancy.
Yeah.
The second, our inner order, the Rosea Rubia of Aurora Crucis, which we get the Rosicrucians from.
Yeah, so we got the Rosicrucians, especially over in Spain, right?
Yes.
So like, what's this Rose Order? And then like, how does that go back to like the Illuminati and like protecting the bloodline and all that other stuff?
And there's a huge, if people want to know, there's a huge Rosicrucian museum and a big Rosicrucian order in California. And they have an Egyptian museum there and they have obelisk and all kinds of really cool stuff.
And we'll get into the Egyptian stuff. So keep going. I'm glad you touched on that.
The second order taught magic, including scrying, astral travel, and alchemy. Which alchemy always seems, I don't know that much about alchemy. I know a little bit, I know the part like, oh, let's change these elements and make it gold or whatever. But I would like to do a podcast on alchemy. I think it would be interesting. The third order was that of the secret chiefs, who were said to be highly skilled. They supposedly direct the activities of the lower 2 orders by spirit communication with the chiefs of the second order.
Yeah.
The foundational documents, because I think we need to get into that, of the original Order of the Golden Dawn, known as the cipher manuscripts, are written in English using the Trithmesius cipher.
Yeah.
So they were all ciphered. The manuscripts give the specific outlines of the grade rituals of the order and prescribe a curriculum of graduated teachings that encompass Hermetic Kabbalah, astrology, occult Terra, geomancy, and alchemy.
Yeah.
So they kind of took all of those, put them all together. Thanks to Israel, though, all that ciphering and all that would take you a lifetime to figure out was put into that book.
He translated it.
And a lot of people didn't like that he did this.
No, because
and we'll get into that.
And we know what happens, right? Remember I said priests at a certain time when they were taking the knowledge of Hermes, they wanted to hold it onto themselves. They wanted to hoard that information because it gave them a sense of power over others. And that's why people don't like that. When you disseminate knowledge, it gets rid of that false power spectrum.
So, of course, with the lodges that were going on, and with Freemasonry, William Wynne Westcott, he was the one that decoded them in 1887. And then from there, another fellow Freemason, Samuel Little McGregor Mathers, great Scottish name.
Yeah, great name.
He got the second opinion and then went through and then turned to him, and they began to work on a coherent system that people could follow. Yeah.
Because it was all over the place. So all this knowledge was split between certain groups, and they're like, how do we just unify it and put it on one straight path for everybody?
Yeah. And so Mathers and Westcott, both of them, William Robert Woodman, Mathers, Westcott, they all came together, and brought these cipher manuscripts into a workable format. Mathers, however, is generally credited with the design of the curriculum and rituals of the Second Order. And there's a name for that, which is like the Rosia Crucis, the Ruby Rose and Golden Cross is what they call it. And you can see that a lot in Rosicrucians.
Yeah.
The first temple was founded in 1887. Westcott claimed to have written to a German countess and prominent Rosicrucian named Anna Springle. And she came in and helped decode the parts that they couldn't decode in these cipher manuscripts. And then she had the ability, which they didn't fully, but she had the ability to contact certain supernatural identities known as the secret chiefs. Mm-hmm. And they were considered the authorities over, they were supernatural entities, but they were considered the authorities over the magical order or the esoteric organization. And they said that they were a part of that. Westcott reportedly received a reply from Spiegel granting permission to establish a Golden Dawn temple. So they asked this woman for permission for this. And then they ended up, Westcott, Mathers, and Woodman made 5 grades outlining the manuscript. And then they brought this, and this was interesting, in 1888, they called it the Isis Urania Temple. Yeah. And it was founded in London.
Yeah, Temple of Isis.
And known in this time, so this is 1888, they welcomed women to participate in the order in perfect, this is what they said in their writings, in perfect equality with men. Yeah. Now, in 1888, that's a huge deal.
It was a massive
deal. You have to understand their consciousness.
Women couldn't vote at that time.
Yes, yeah. And so they were considered complete equals.
Yeah. And that's a big jump from a lot of, private groups. If you're in London, you want to be a part of like your little niche group. Yeah. It's like, no, gentlemen only.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we talked about in the Freemason. So I really start to pay attention to something like you said when you start going countercultural.
Yeah.
Because that's why I like Jesus' teachings and stuff like that. Cause he was the same way, he's like, women are allowed to learn just as much. So anytime you see a religious dogma where there's a hierarchy and then you see something coming in that begins to threaten all of that, now you're seeing light penetrate darkness,
Yeah. A golden dawn.
Yeah. A golden dawn.
Enlightenment.
The inner order, the first order, that was established in 1892. And then from there, they began to disseminate this information, and it began to grow, and it moved into the Osiris temple, and then they had a Horus temple in Bradford, and then they had an Amun-Ra temple in Edinburgh, and then they had the Hathor temple that was in Paris, France.
Yeah, why do they continually go back to ancient Egypt? Well, because there was a time in the earlier dynasties of Egypt when this Hermes gentleman showed up.
Yes.
And there was a large dissemination of this knowledge. And a lot of this knowledge was found in this thing called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And the Egyptian Book of the Dead laid a massive foundation for this order itself and all the other orders, frankly, even Freemasons and everything else, because this was the knowledge of the priests at the time. And so they're like, oh, this is something we need to look at. We need to look at the rituals and understand the function of how the spiritual realm actually works. And so what they do is they pay homage to certain gods of Egypt at the time, right? Thoth, Isis, all those other individuals. And then that's where we find a lot of the basis. And that's why they'll build temples, in their honor. Mm. And that's why, like you said, like, why do you have obelisks and all those other things? Is because it was such a heavy influence that has been carried through for thousands of years from the Egyptian Book of the Dead and Hermes. They're like, this is the knowledge that has to be passed down. And understanding of it, the symbolism of it, is what Israel Regardi, the gentleman who put together this tomb over here, had championed himself to do and make it public knowledge. So I was like, what is the actual understanding of Hermes Trismegistus? What does the Book of the Dead mean? And how does that tie into Kabbalistic Judaism, right? And all those other, or Christian mysticism? How do we blend all those things together and see like, oh, where is the golden thread in between all of this?
Yeah. And I want to talk about these secret chiefs because some of the followers believed in the Golden Dawn tradition that the secret chiefs were not human or supernatural beings, but rather symbolic representations of actual or legendary sources of spiritual esotericism. But the term came to stand for a great leader or teacher of a spiritual practice that found its way into the teachings of the order. So whether, in Israel didn't believe that Jesus was real,
he wasn't.
He kind of took this that they were not really human or supernatural beings, but they were a representation of.
Yeah. So if you don't have proof of it, then people end up believing in it. And belief says that I need to be submissive to a hierarchy for somebody else to tell me that there's truth in something without me realizing it myself. The person named Jesus a person named Jesus, there is a person that they said, oh, this guy was Jesus. Well, Jesus was a falsified name.
And people don't realize Yeshua was Joshua, where we get, and it was a common name.
Yeah, Yeshua ben Joseph was the name that they were looking at. And so what does Yeshua mean? So just to kind of break this down, because this was a deep realization for me. When you talk about the Tetragrammatron in the early Kabbalistic religion, it's Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, which is like YWHW. Now, in Hebrew, you're looking at those four things. Those are like the four elements. Okay, like they have the bull, the man, the hawk, and like one other thing. But that is almost incomplete because we know that man is representative of the pentagram. We have 5 points, right? The head, 2 arms, 2 legs.
Right.
Okay. So that's the geometry of our body. So there's something missing here in the geometry. I can't have 4 letters and have that as a representation of what man is. Well, the thing that's missing in the word Yeshua or Jesus is the letter Shin. And Shin is representative of spirit. So when you have Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and you input the Shin in the middle of it, Yud-Heh-Vav-Shin, Shin-Vav-Heh was actually saying Yeshua. So it's saying you have all aspects of man, material aspects, plus the spirit. And that's where you get the term Jesus, which is the Anglicized, whatever, is the English version over time of what this word is actually meaning. So the individual, the name Jesus is a misnomer to who the person really, was, okay? Which, guy's name's Emmanuel, still born in a little town, still a Jewish rabbi, does all this other stuff. But over time, people are saying, okay, how do we apply a different sort of aspect and understanding to what this name means? And so if you can understand where the name Jesus comes from, you can actually look at the Golden Dawn and how that ties in with Judaism and the Tetragrammatron and understanding where Shin, which is representative of spirit, gets put into that geometry, that square, to make it a pentagram. And so you can see how all these things come together.
It's all one.
When you said they are studying, the 4, main aspects, like geomancy, alchemy, all those other things, what it's saying is those pieces are required to get yourself to this understanding. So you have words that mean something, individual letters that mean something, even in a numeric sense, right? And then, the geometry of something means something when there's a combination, or colors, all these things coming together. That's essentially the alchemy. It's more of an alchemy of the mind rather than a physical one, which everyone seems to be obsessed with.
Yeah, and this is what I thought is interesting, was with the resurgence of this happening now, you also, and it's funny how it
Post Malone.
Yeah, it's funny how it but mid 1890s, the Golden Dawn became huge in Great Britain. And so celebrities, so let's talk about celebrities belonging to the Golden Dawn, actress Florence Fair, you had Irish revolutionaries, Irish poets, Welsh authors, English authors, which was, thank you, sir, which one of the English authors was Aleister Crowley, which, that everybody always thinks of him. And, I know the 1970s with the music that we talked about, that, do what thou will, and, know, all of that. And Led Zeppelin getting involved at, in fact, what's his name owns his castle. The guitar, Jimmy Page, lives in Aleister Crowley's castle.
Interesting.
But, and then they got into,
that's a cool fact. I didn't know that.
Yeah. They got into magic and stuff like that. But, and I don't want to get into Aleister Crowley's life, because I feel like people don't realize when they put somebody on a pedestal, that they're human. They're a person. They're going to do,
Don't raise someone up to be a god.
Yeah, don't raise somebody to be a god, because they're going to do like Gandhi. They said that in his time frame he would be with multiple women, or he'd have 12-year-old girls lay with him all night long.
Come on, Gandhi.
Yeah. But everybody elevates somebody like that to a god, and then when they do something bad, it devastates them, like these megachurch pastors in the United States and stuff like that. Which you have to realize, what we view as sin or bad or whatever, those things always are going to happen. You're not going to have a perfect being.
They're human
around.
beings.
Yes.
That's what you get for attaching yourself to a delusional reality.
Yes.
Of saying that there is a God. There's no such thing as God. God is a creature of creation. And when I say creature, it's a creature of your thoughts. No one is a God. It's just creation altogether. There's nothing that can stand in tow with what, perfect, the absolute of everything that is around us.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to watch men, and I use men in particular, how all of a sudden, Aleister Crowley starts to become this polarizing figure, and then people saying, I'm part of Aleister Crowley, or I'm part of Mathers, or I'm part of this person, in the group. And so then that's when
creates
you start
a division.
seeing, that's when you start seeing the disputes arise, and then the temples begin to split off. And
see, look at this. That's a fine example. Remember how we talked about last episode? Anything that doesn't unify, stray away from.
Yes.
That does not, because it goes against creational laws. And what you're finding here is, as these people are like, oh, we need to disembark from this group and create our own, like all these subsects, the whole thing starts to fall apart. You kill the power in something. And I'm talking about like a positive power, not one that's like, abusive to people, but
right.
You start to destroy it.
Well, and this is interesting because Mathers ended up becoming Crowley's friend, but everyone in London, all the London officials said, no, we don't want Crowley to be a part of this. So Mathers goes to the Paris temple, and then Crowley gets the secretary from the Paris temple to give him leadership orders. And then, you could just see how all of this is. There was a Miss Cronell was the acting secretary at the time.
Becomes very political.
So they get papers acknowledging his grade. So now he's in title. So then London splits from them. And so then now he's in Paris. And March 3rd, this is interesting, a committee of 7, and they called them adepts. Adepts. Were elected and they requested a full investigation of the matter.
Yeah.
This is 1880, so we need a full investigation.
Yeah, you can see him just like slamming stabs and stuff like that.
And so Mathers, being Crowley's friends, dismissed it and said, I don't need to provide you any proof. And so he refused to acknowledge that the London temple was a temple. So, and so then they have a general meeting.
Yeah.
And it was called on March 29th in London to remove Mathers as chief and expel him from the order.
Yeah, goodbye. Yeah.
And so that's where the splinter hats. Then you have a reconstruction. So now here's what began to happen. Mather realized that reconciliation was impossible. He makes an effort to try to reestablish himself in London, because that's where the money's coming from, I would imagine, and all that.
Correct.
So then he decides to appoint Edward Burridge as his representative. And according to Francis King, historical evidence shows that there were 23 members. And so they began to say, nah, we're not into this. So they make the split. Aleister Crowley's almost like a little, we all would say he's probably a little on the crazy side.
You bet it's very negatively oriented.
Yeah, it's very, the black magic part more appealed to him.
Magic woman.
And so the crazy part is, as this is all happening, the Golden Dawn begins to come into the United States.
Yeah.
In 1900.
As it's falling apart in Europe.
Yeah, as it's falling apart.
It's like, get me across the Atlantic.
Yeah, so it gets here, and then they make the Thoth Hermes Temple, and it's founded in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And the beginning of the First World War in 1914, Mathers begins to establish temples here in the United States. So he gets 3 of them. And most of the temples of the Alpha, Omega, the Stella Matina closed. So things are closing, like you said. Things are opening up here. And so now we see it beginning to spread across the world. It goes to New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And New Zealand order lasts all the way up into 1978.
Kiwis.
Yes. Isn't that crazy?
Very isolated group down there.
So as we begin to, look at that, I kind of want to go through, and maybe you can stop me when you get this, but the first order is the introduction. So, and it follows in the book too, which is the neophyte.
Yeah. Neophyte. That means like, I'm just starting to learn.
Right.
I'm going to take the first initial steps to put myself in a direction to actually become the adept. And that, requires a lot of study, doing the rituals, understanding how to, digest all this hermetic information properly. How do all these things interrelate with one another?
And then it goes, that's the first order. And then there's the second order, which is Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Major, Adeptus Expentius. Then the third order is Master Templi and all that. Mm-hmm. But the paired numbers attached to the grades related to the position of the Tree of Life.
Yeah, so
and the Tree of Life is everything, and you can see in the book. So let's get into, I don't want to, we could do a whole episode on Tree of Life, but let's talk.
Everything's interrelated. So in the Tree of Life, they say that the energy, the spiritual energy, is broken down into 22 different sections. And there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And so this is where you get the number plays that go into the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. But this was the older mystic traditions of the Jewish religion. And what they're saying here with this Tree of Life is that when you are moving up it, you're developing yourself from the base.
Right.
All the way up through the crown, which sits at the very top. The Kether, I think it's called. And so as you begin to move through these grades, you see how one grade might be interactive or how it might touch all these different aspects of the Tree of Life. And so as you begin to understand the interlinks between all of them, you can elevate yourself up to this point where you're actually living in the crown. You've opened yourself up in terms of knowledge. You've reached that point of enlightenment, your own golden dawn, and that you can live up in the Kether, stage number 22.
Yeah, and so the first order grades were related to the four elements of earth, air, water, and fire.
And think about that. So that's your first order grade. So they're saying, what are the basic material elements of life? And so that's what your focus is going to be on. So everything's going to be kept in the base, right? So you have to think how everything works congruently here. Right. This is there's a lot of geometry involved. And so when we think about this geometry, not only in how it's learned, its structure, right? But also spiritually in a non-material aspect, how does this geometry interlink? All right, so you have to keep that in mind. Everything's very congruent.
Yeah, and I liked it. I mean, they had to understand each of the elements, the metaphysical meanings of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is late 1800s, late 1900s. So there was a written exam, and they had to demonstrate skills, of course, which was probably taken from the Freemason side of things. But I do feel like, even though I do feel like some people do well in religious studies where it's like a test, an exam, it's logical more in that, and it gets that part of their brain. It gives them structure. It
gives them structure. A lot of people have a hard time, just structuring themselves. So they require some sort of outside guidance to give them that structure. Remember how we said you learn from the inside out and the outside in? That's like the outside in for them. Okay. It's like, okay, so what can I follow to go down this path to evolve myself? This is by the way, this is the first time I ever learned that the word SALT is an acronym. Did you know that?
SALT is an acronym.
Yeah, like the stuff you put on your food.
Yes.
The rock that you eat.
Yes.
It's
a crystal.
Yeah, it goes back to Latin as subtilis aeris terra, subtilis, something with subtle air light of the earth. I forget what the Latin is for it. But when you have subtle air light of the earth, that's SALT. That's the acronym for it. So I just figured that's an interesting fact. People probably enjoy learning that. Like, I didn't know what SALT meant. I didn't know what the tetragrammatron mean.
So this is interesting. I interviewed a guy on my podcast the other day, and he created this machine. DARPA actually funded it, in the time with the military and stuff.
Classic.
So he and I saw the machine, and he has it, and you can even buy it online. But he literally, you can take a SALT and put it into this machine that fits in your hand, and it has a cell phone battery, which cell phone batteries are cheap right now. These machines cost about $40-$50 to make. And you put salt in the machine, and out comes chlorine to purify water.
That's so cool.
So literally, this guy was old guy, super cool. Rodney's his name with a Southern accent. He's like super high up engineer or whatever. So it can do 10. So the battery life,
potassium chloride.
But it can do 10 gallons of water a day. And it costs about 30 cents a year to run with salt.
So for cleaning water.
Salt. Yeah. So literally,
you could take electricity to remove the potassium, the bond to the potassium, to just leave you with the chloride. What a smart dude! I don't know.
And so you can run over this machine because DARPA wanted it to be indestructible military, so you can run over it or whatever. It's super rugged, so you can literally in each village, put one of these little devices in somebody's hand. And because he was saying that not in our country, but in most countries, especially third world countries, 50% of the hospital beds are water related illnesses.
Go to Taos.
Yeah.
There's nowhere you have to get water delivered to your house, and you have to put chlorine in there to to kind of clean out and kill some of the bacteria that's sitting in there.
But I just thought that was interesting. It was so interesting he literally solved the issue.
What a cool dude. That's awesome.
Yeah, I know. It's awesome. But I want to get into the book.
Keep going.
And then I want to get into the author.
Yeah. Israel Regardie.
Yeah. So, because I want people to understand that. He was born in 1907 and he died in 1985.
Short life.
They called him ceremonial magician, English occultist. He spent most of his life in the United States and he wrote 15 books on occultism. But this is kind of cool. He was born to a working class Orthodox Jewish family in the East End part of London. Regarding his family, soon moved to Washington, D.C. in the United States because, being Jewish family, I think his mom was Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Jewish Ukrainian. Regardie had rejected Orthodox Judaism during his teenage years and took an interest in theosophy, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jewish mysticism.
We talked about theosophy.
Yes.
And theosophy was extremely popular. And so
hard to say living, we have a lot of that.
We have a large combination of all these things. So I'm glad we're building all these backgrounds for everybody so they get a little bit of the understanding. Interesting that he ends up in DC.
Yeah. And so this is interesting.
Freemason Center, obelisks.
Yes. And so one of his main interests was yoga. And in this process, he ended up just encountering the occultist Aleister Crowley. Mm-hmm. And he talks about him and he's very balanced about him. And I'm going to share some of the things that he says about Aleister Crowley. I'll pull it up on my phone because I like the way, because I know he's a polarizing figure, but let me pull it up right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think it's in my Google
Drive. Are you pulling
folder.
it up or pulling it down?
That's what she said. Oh, we are so bad.
Silence.
My glasses off.
Secrets.
Yeah, sorry. This is what he says. He said, finally, Dr. Regardie is sometimes accused of betraying Crowley by exposing his faults. And he wrote the eye in the triangle.
You expose someone's faults and people get mad at you.
But he wanted to unravel the truth about Crowley because he became like this god, like you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a lot of good statements and did a lot of good writings and stuff like that. Regardie is often hated because, as one member of the Crowley's clan, he said, how dare Regardie, he said people were talking about Crowley being a prophet and all that stuff. But he gets into this. He says, assertions such as these often amaze me as their authors attempt to pass off their need for hero worship as moral imperatives. It is both funny and pathetic what a fool can do with a few footnotes. Wild assertions, academic style, and cliches cannot take the place of critical thinking.
Remember we always say thinking for yourself?
Yes. And so I just like that, even though, because here's the interesting part. So he found Aleister Crowley's writings. He began to really study him. He contacts Crowley, and Crowley likes him so much, he invites him to serve as his secretary. Mm-hmm. And thus he had to move to Paris, because that's where the temple was at. So he followed Crowley there. And then Crowley ended up moved to England. He follows him there. And then in England is where their kind of association ended. He wrote 2 books while he was there. Israel did. One on the Kabbalah. It's called A Garden of Pomegranates and the Tree of Life. And then 1934. And then in 1934, he joined the Stella Martina, a ceremonial magic order descended from the defunct Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Because that had, this is 1934. So that had gone. But then he grew dissatisfied with its leadership, because that seemed to be the issue with all of this. And he left. And then he began studying psychology. And then he got into Christian mysticism and Jungian philosophy. And then in 1937, he returns to the United States and concerned that the Golden Dawn system of Saramagic would be lost. He published this book.
Very cool.
That we look at. And he did this book from 1938 to 1940. Yeah. In 2 years.
It's a
This thing can kill you if you drop it from a top bookshelf.
Can you show people how big that book is, though? Yeah, I mean, this weighs like what? 10 pounds?
Yeah,
maybe?
At least.
I remember how strong my biceps got just reading this thing.
And this is when he made this book. a lot of people wanted to have nothing to do with them because they felt like it should be secret.
Yeah.
And then he brought it out. But this is really cool because they said he declared an oath of secrecy and all that stuff. So a lot of people were angry at him. But then the Second World War hits. And so he decides to go in the army. He goes in the army, and then upon returning, he gets a doctorate degree in psychology, relocates in 1947 to Los Angeles, and then he sets up practice as a chiropractor. And in 1981, he retires as a chiropractor. And guess where he moved to and passed away?
Where?
He died of a heart attack. He moved to Sedona.
Really?
Yeah.
A big old spiritual center. I guess that's when it was picking up. Remember we had Michael Horn on the previous episode?
Yes,
that was about the same time.
Yes, exactly. But I thought it was really interesting to kind of get into a little bit. But I want to get into his first works, and you had talked about this. I know you know a lot about it on Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be, to me, from looking over that book, I haven't read it all, but you have, is that seems to me to be the biggest influence.
That's one of his largest influences, and it speaks a lot to his upbringing, right? His Jewish upbringing.
Yes.
But if we go to, here we go. So what you find here is that in the Kabbalism with the Tree of Life, you have all these different stages and all these different representatives of, maybe there's a certain divinity that takes power over that certain stage. But when he is applying that, he breaks a lot down with the numerical aspect and the geometry. And I think it was an easier way to translate as a basis or a beginning of knowledge to say that the Kabbalistic Judaism had a great deal of information that wasn't lost from Hermes Trismegistus. So this was a big starting point for him. It allowed him the foundation stone to kind of move into the rest of everything and help actually explain what the Egyptian Book of the Dead was talking about.
Right.
And you see that there's a massive connection between Egyptian study and Jewish studies, rather than how people tend to separate a lot of them. Well, there's a lot of shared commonalities, but a basis for them actually come and were preserved in, more of the Kabbalistic Jewish faith. And that's why it's such a large focus here.
Yeah, and even in 1935, he finished a book called My Rosicrucian Adventure.
Yeah,
and the Rosicrucians are big in the Egyptians. So I want us to tie in, if you would speak to this, Alex. I want us to tie in the why the Egyptian teachings and because we always look at movies, of Egyptian life, and I think a lot of us, and we always think of it as being a super esoteric thing, but what happened that the Egyptians, even to this point, even today, is so influential in religions?
Yeah, that's interesting. And
I don't know if you want to get into extraterrestrials or not, but
no, that's okay. So when we go back to Egypt, there are always these divine figures that come down from the sky, and they give strong bodies of teachings that are recorded by the priests. And they're like, oh, there's many religions. And then you have, certain pharaohs that would come around and say, we should just focus on like one God. It was very polytheistic, much like what the Greeks had.
Now, did the pharaohs declare themselves gods?
No, actually what happens is people would declare the pharaoh a god.
Now, would he be of extraterrestrial lineage or?
Not necessarily. So some of them, there could have been a possibility of like, maybe say there was a crossbreeding, like maybe some advanced civilization came down and, bred with normal humans at the time. Because
I know in the Bible it talks about, it uses things saying that fallen angels came down, when Lucifer fell out of heaven, and then fallen angels came down and they bred with humans, and this is the story of the Bible in the Old Testament, and then from there they created the giants, which we know giants lived on Earth. That there were
Abraham Lincoln talks about them. You can go check out their graves. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, we have
bones and all that.
People would go dig them up for fun. They would like take their girlfriend out. You want to go dig up giant bones? But if we go back to Egypt and we look at the influence of Egypt at the time, Egypt had a recognition through the information they received from this individual called Thoth, or who you would call Hermes, both the same individual, that there was something going on in the spirit world. We need to look to the spirit, the unseen world, the occult world, because it helps the development of an individual, right? Whether it be a pharaoh, right? So if you're going into the pyramid at the time, what this is teaching you is that you're there for a spiritual evolution. So you are going through a metaphorical death. Okay, this is what the Book of the Dead's talking about. It's not saying, oh, this is what happens when you die. No.
That's what we call baptism.
Yeah. Right. So that's exactly right. So if we're looking at what they wanted people to do was metaphorically die, go into darkness, which you could not see anything, and you're left with your thoughts, right? And these visualizations and this process that would happen so that when you came back out to the light, you were an enlightened individual. You were now connected with this other half of yourself that had been unseen. But it was important to go through these recorded steps that Thoth or Hermes actually brought through so that they could teach. But like, this is what the Book of the Dead is talking about. This is how you can actually connect with the other half of who you really are.
Yeah, and I think it's important to even take a step back from that when we look at the Egyptian religion, whatever you want to call it, the teachings, and look at creation and how the Egyptians, because they were probably the first one that began to really talk about creation.
Yeah, the Egyptians did talk a lot about creation, especially when the focus came in after Ramses II on monotheistically looking at Amun-Ra.
Right.
To say that this one individual god, the sun god, was the one that allows for this creation, that sends down the energy, spiritually, everything. This is the one we need to look at. And Amun-Ra, the Greek version of that is Zeus. That's where you see the adoption of it, right? And that's where you get the representative like ram horns and things of that nature. But they're all completely interconnected. But when you start looking at creational law, they were very close to understanding how, nature truly worked. And that adoption of that information was made into a religion by the priests later. But in the earlier stages, right, they were very much in line with how things actually worked around them and how they interacted with it, the seen and the unseen. And it was only later until the dogmas were put in place and the people that had the knowledge, the knowers and the known, remember that hierarchy that comes in place, that separation, that idea of having power over others, that's when the issues, became involved in it. And that's when, it started to break apart. And so what Israel Regardie is saying, well, why don't I cut through what all those priests were talking about, and why don't I just disseminate all of the knowledge? So rather than just hand it to you drip by drip, always keeping you like on the leash, or dangling the carrot in front of your face, I'm going to give you everything right here. And that was kind of his basis, is like, how do I take the Kabbalistic aspects? How do I take the best parts of what the Egyptians understood with creation, right? And, how they interact with nature and everything else like that. And how do I blend these things together to give that basis of knowledge for people that really want to understand what it means to become enlightened? And if you look at the very first quote, when you open up this book, he said, dedicated to all true seekers of the light. And that's all in caps, true seekers of the light, people that are actually critically trying to think for themselves. And this book forces you to make those connections. That's what he was writing about. And he said, may what they find herein sustain them in their search for quintessence, the stone of the philosophers. That search, that quintessence, that philosopher's stone, that's the aspect of alchemy, is understanding how you integrate all of these different things, the physical and the non-physical, to actually create what he calls true wisdom and perfect happiness, the summum bonum, the totality of all knowledge. And that's what this is like he's saying, I'm going to give you what I know, my understanding of this world. And I hope that you can come to some sort of understanding, maybe even greater than what I knew through your own critical thinking, but I'm going to assimilate this knowledge together for you.
Right.
As non-dogmatically as possible. I'll give you all the rituals, everything they did. Now it's time for you to take this tomb as a tool and apply it for your own research.
Yeah, and I know it's encapsulated in magic and stuff like that. And I want to break magic down. And he has a great, and I put this in my notes in my Google Docs, so that's why I'm using my phone in here. But it says this: magic is the attempt to control paranormal or natural forces by ritual, imagination, and other techniques to conform to the will of the operator. This is what I love. He says this: the term will in this context refers to the force of desire.
Yeah, the force of desire. So when you're looking at the ritual is a constant application of the same thing. So it forces the actual conscious thoughts on your body to always apply themselves so consistently that it buries itself into the subconscious, and then that becomes a will, so that every action you do is always geared in the direction of creating that specific outcome. So whether that be something, of magic, right, of the unseen, they're constantly pushing themselves in their conscious thought through the repetition of these practices to force it into the subconscious, so they always think and act in that realm. So I'm living in the material, but I can also take the immaterial aspects, the magic, the unseen, the occult, and begin to study it properly. It actually becomes a force of will at that point.
Yes.
And that's when you get something to show up. So if you're looking at Harry Potter, you know, they're Wingardium Leviosa, and they're getting like the feather to lift up in the air, right? And she's like, no, you're not saying it right. It's the repetition that builds itself into the subconscious, and that forced will is the thing that creates great things to happen. It creates that action. Or inaction, for that matter.
So even like not having a feather move or whatever, but just in your personal life, looking at that repetition. If I do 100 push-ups a day, 5 days a week, and I do that for 5 years, I'm going to be a different person off the wheel that I did that action over and over and over again.
That's correct.
It's not, when we think words of esoteric and all these things, and I know there's maybe some people and they're like, this is all bullshit. No, what we're talking, it's you imposing on your own free will to accomplish something that's greater than yourself.
And that's what the magic is.
Yes, that's the
How
magic.
am I taking immaterial to create this very powerful will inside of me to create outcomes outside of me? That's where the magic happens.
Yes, and I want to get into black and white magic and stuff like that. So he says also this. The control of paranormal forces can mean learning from higher powers to finding the right mate. I didn't understand that, the right mate.
Scrying, things that. So mate. So there has to be balance, right? There's a lot of talk between the masculine and the feminine powers.
Yes.
So finding that perfect mate, that perfect balance. You know, Amanda, she's my perfect balance, right?
Right.
She's exactly what
So that's why he's viewing as when he says mate.
Yeah, it's exactly what I need. And so if you're looking at that in terms of, you know, speaking to higher powers, whatever they might be, there's a couple things that are happening here. You know, and Israel Regardie said this too. When you're going through these rituals and they say that, oh, we're going through geomancy and we want something to show up in the room, right? Whatever it might be, this sort of, you know, immaterial creature. There's two things that could happen. There is a possibility that it is something that comes from a spiritual realm that is manifesting itself.
Right.
Or there's the fact that the ritual has become so strong in thought to these people that are doing it that they are so adamant consciously about it that they create a small delusion within themselves so that they are thinking they're actually seeing and interacting with something, but what they're doing is they're interacting with a combined consciousness in the room. And he said so it could be two of those other things. And this is where his critical thought came in. He's not saying, oh, you know, some spiritual being showed up. It actually happens with the ritual.
People, this is very important.
No,
Continue. I love this.
He lays out these rituals to show what they're doing, but he's saying there's a possibility of outcomes where you're so ingrained in it, and it could possibly be a delusion, or it could possibly be some sort of spiritual being that you've kind of tapped into. But it's impossible to tell. But he said you can determine kind of what information is actually derived from it, whether it's positive or negative, right? In whatever that stance, but there's a learning that is happening within it.
Yes.
Whether it's real or unreal.
This is so good. This is probably right there is probably my favorite part of all our podcasts. For me, this resonates because like we talked about simulation theory before.
Yeah.
It is you taking your will and creating. It's creation.
It's literally creation. You are acting as creation because we've talked about in all our episodes. We're part and parcel of creation. Our spirit is creation itself.
Yes.
That's what that animates our entire body. And so that assimilation theory is like you're defining so much will that you're creating whatever this thing might be. You're
and that
so
creation is, and that's why judgment and all this stuff it's all an illusion because you're creating a different world than I'm creating.
Yes, of course, but we're co-creating together.
And when we get together and our will aligns, then we have
a hyper oneness.
Whether you want to believe it's an actual being from a different realm, or whether our consciousness is collectively creating that.
Yes.
It does not matter. We need to not focus on that part. We need to focus on the part that we're creating something.
That's the most important part. It's the co-creation. It's not the outcome of the geomancy or what the magic is doing.
That's what everybody focuses on.
Everybody focuses on that other aspect, but the real special sauce of it is the fact that you and I have come together in a unifying purpose and collectively focused on something. And we've created this together through the might of our will.
Yes.
The might of our thoughts. That is the real beauty of it. That's the unifying.
That's the magic.
That's the magic and majesty of what this is. But everyone always wants to focus on what's the outcome. Like, what is this creature going to tell me?
Or who is this creature? Did he have black eyes? Was he gray? Was he blue?
It's like, that's not what it is.
Yes.
It's just the fact that you have this unifying purpose.
Yeah, and he said some individuals regard some forms of magic as either black or white. Apparently, this means that black magic correlates with self-interest and harming others, while white magic relates to spiritual pursuits and helping others. Magic, however, is magic, regardless of what ends one pursues or how you might moralize about the means used to accomplish it.
So what he's saying is, regardless of what goal you want on the outcome, right, or on the on the outset or outcome of it, and what morals, delusional morals, to say that this is good or bad, because that's all a human perspective.
Right.
You decide for yourself. He said that doesn't matter. You can put it as black, black or white magic, but in the totality of it, it's just magic.
Yes.
Right?
And he says this, and this is going to go right along with what we're saying. This is so beautiful. He said, like science, magic must remain immoral, uninfluenced by any set of standards except knowledge and results.
Yes.
Because that's the creation.
Because the idea, let's explain this. It wants to test itself. Magic, these rituals are almost like the hypothesis. If this, then that, right? It's like the algorithm, so if I put this input, does this happen on the output? That's what's happening. It's an evolutionary process through the force of will. But we all want to apply our moral philosophy, say, oh, that's good, that's bad, that's trying to do harm, or all this other stuff. But that's not what's going on. It's to have the critical thought of your own will to help yourself evolve and self-reflect. And all this other stuff that comes with it is just an outcome. But in truth, the magic is just a tool.
But through that will, the outcome could be negative or positive.
Yeah, and it's
like voodoo and all that stuff.
It's
you go to
negative
New
or
Orleans
positive,
and
right?
You can buy the little doll and they'll poke you and then you're like, ow.
Yeah.
With enough will, if you got a group of people and they collectively, like Jesus willed himself, in the story of Jesus being on the cross, Jesus went to the garden and he asked God, he said, his father, Father, I don't want to take this burden. I don't want to die for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go through the suffering of the cross. Crucifixion was the worst part of death. And he was in such agony that they said, in the Bible that he was sweating blood because of that will, because he knew that he had to take the sacrifice of mankind upon himself, and it's an allegory, a story or whatever, but however people want to view it. But when you look at that amount of prayer to get to that point, and yogis talk about this, and where they can, in Tibet, they can go up into the snow and they've proven this, it's on YouTube and everything else. And they can be in such meditation and they can put themselves, deep into the snow. They'll dig a big hole and then they come an hour later and all the snow's melted around them in a perfect circle.
Right.
We don't realize, we
don't realize
scientifically
the power of the force of will.
Yes.
We do not scientifically have a way to measure the spirit realm, the realm of the spirit that's inside of you, right? The immaterial. We're very bad at it. We have no way to do it. So that's why our science has led ourselves, so dogmatically in one direction, such a material direction that we've missed the other half. And what he's saying is like, well, here's a scientific way to measure your force of will. That's what it is. And I'm going to give you the rituals to do so, the knowledge, so you can set yourself in that direction so you can learn from it. Because right now everything's over here, but what about this other aspect of life?
But this is the supernatural part that people don't realize. Like Wim Hof, the breathing guy, he brought that all back.
Wim Hof,
hypertrophic breathing and all that, and they injected him with Ebola and they documented this. And then through breathing, he was able to kick the virus right out of him, and then they could put him in ice baths and he could melt the ice, and like the Tibetan thing. We do not realize the power of our will. We call it supernatural, but it's not.
It's not. If it was supernatural, again, that's something that's a miracle. Then it would say that creation.
Yes.
There's a logical flaw in it.
Or Wim Hof is special.
No, he's not special. He's just doing something you haven't recognized yet. So you witness it as a miracle, but it's absolutely explainable.
And he says that and he goes, come to where, I think he's like in Eastern Europe or something. He's like, come here, we'll have class. I'll show you how you can do it too.
Yes. And I think that comes back to that dissemination of knowledge, that dissemination of balance, that, we have a very masculine, scientifically driven world right now, but he also talks about, well, where's the mate? Where's the feminine? Where's the balance of that? And these are the interesting aspects, is measuring that force of will through these rituals and these practices so that we can have some sort of tool, and this was their tool to help understand the development in a spiritual side.
Yes, and I think this goes right along, and I talked to you this before the podcast, and I want you to talk about this, is the word that we use that's, I'm learning this, and you've shared this with me, but the word that we use has such false, it has a false narrative, let's say that, and that's the word faith.
Yeah, faith. Because if we look at faith as a prerequisite has to have belief. And when you say faith, that says, I don't know, so I have to take your word for it. I have to trust without even verifying myself.
Yes.
You know, what is trust but verify?
Yes.
What is that? It's a military thing.
Yeah.
So you have to go out and verify it for yourself. You have to have that critical thought, because if you don't think critically, you are not evolving yourself. You're saying, I am going to give my responsibility of my evolution over to somebody else, to have faith in something that I have no truthful understanding of, which forces me to believe. And that means that faith that I haven't recognized to be a truth says that I have to bend myself to whatever they say is the truth for me, because I'm not doing my own critical thought.
Or like
it removes you of your free will. Faith is saying, I'm going to take your free will. Okay. I'm going to give it up to these people so they can tell me how to live and how to think, rather than me saying, okay, what's my own model that works for me? Where's my critical self-thought so I can determine if that is the truth?
Is it empowering you?
No, it's disempowering.
Yes.
Faith disempowers. Faith makes the consciousness sluggish. It sends you into an abyss of darkness where you don't think for yourself. It causes you to unevolve. You find unknowledge. And in that darkness, you walk around feeling for walls because you can't find your path.
Or you're waiting for someone to take your hand
and guide you down
to
that way.
wall.
Rather, it needs you to figure out what path you need to take.
And Israel was really big on that. I mean, even at the end of that statement, he said,
faith destroys your will.
Yeah, he said, uninfluenced by any set of standards except knowledge and results.
Correct.
So when you look at faith, it's the same as that lady and people have made fun of her on YouTube or whatever, but that older lady in Florida, and she's like, I won't get COVID because I have enough faith in my Lord Jesus Christ.
Doesn't happen like that.
That doesn't happen. And people's done that, like Jehovah's Witnesses won't get blood transfusion, because that's
even for their children or anything like that.
Yeah, because they have faith.
Faith in what?
In Mormonism, where we look at that and they're like, I have faith that even if I go through this process and I go to these temples and I do all this and they have rituals and all that, then I have faith that I'm going to, rule that planet with my wife and have celestial beings, and it's just so much fault, because this is very important.
Yeah.
Because our world is literally controlled by faith.
It's controlled by
the
delusion.
world religions control this world.
Everything.
Our systems of money.
Not only the money, but your consciousness.
Yes.
They control your will to think for yourself. And they've asked you to give it up, and you've become so lost.
Yes.
You have squandered the light that animates you internally, that you've forgotten what it means to be a human being. And you put your faith in belief in something that defines who you are rather than defining for yourself what needs to happen. You take no responsibility for your actions. You say, I can go kill someone and pass it off to my God.
Right.
I can go create bad actions and pass it off to this thing. But what are you really doing? You learn no self-responsibility. Remember how we talked about in the beginning? You need to feel something negative, right, to actually learn it from an experience. Because if you only get the positive, you're never going to learn something, right? So it's that asymmetry, that unbalance that prevents you from actually evolving in your consciousness and your spirit.
Yeah, and it's that Tom Hanks movie, where we see the priest in the very beginning, and he's doing, you know which one I'm
Da Vinci
talking about.
Code.
Yeah, Da Vinci Code, and in the very beginning,
self-flagellation, where he's hitting himself,
self-flagellation,
whatever it is.
and then he knows that he has to, because murder in the form of religion, which always happens when you get crazy religion out there, which we have a ton
happening
of
for thousands of years.
It's all based off of faith, because what you're doing is when you murder somebody, you're taking their free will.
You take it right away.
And you're doing it in the name of faith.
And you decided for them that it's their time to die.
Yes.
Imagine if someone said, well, I'm going to decide it's time for you to die. And you don't want to know that doesn't work and it's illogical. Does creation just say it's time for you to die? meteorite, boom, right through your car while you're driving.
No,
it doesn't. It doesn't just like make people atomize into dust when it chooses to.
When you die based off of creation, it's just a cause and effect. It's like you were walking around in India and there was a hungry tiger and it happened to just grab you because it was.
It's not just. It's not saying, oh,
it's not faith or fate.
No, it's not faith or fate. You decided to be there. You made all those choices. You put yourself in that scenario. Do not pass it off to something else or to some higher authority or to say that I'm going to wait around for some cosmic influence, because that will never happen because you're being submissive to it. You're not learning to take responsibility. You're not learning to recognize. You're not learning to be wise in your decisions. And when you look at the Proto-Germanic influence of the word Yod-Hed-Vav-Het, which we're talking about here, and how that goes back to an old Lyrian form, what it's saying is Isvich. Isvich is a word for king of wisdom. And so actually accruing to that sort of wisdom and knowledge takes time. And that takes self-awareness. It requires critical thought. And that's
the
why,
opposite of faith.
That's why Yod-Hed-Vav-Het, the Tetragrammaton, is raised up so much, right? It's that wisdom.
Yeah, and so one of the things that he talks about is this pseudoscience, organized religion, and he calls it a disordered force.
Yeah,
and I like those two words, a disordered force, because, and I want us to talk about this, like this force of religion that gets, and it sweeps a country. You know, like in the United States, in you know the 17, it was Christianity and this fear of persecution from, the King of England,
and it uses fear. It uses fear to sweep. It says, "Oh, give up your power. Find safety in us. Don't find safety in critical thought in yourself. Hand it over to us and we'll keep you safe."
And one of the things that I was listening to, and he alludes to this, and I shared with this at the podcast, and I heard a couple people that are heavy into magic on some podcasts I was listening to. They were always talking like, you are the scientific proof. Like, you are.
Yeah.
You don't need faith. You are the proof.
If you woke up and realized that,
yes, that
all of creation is inside of you, you'd be like, holy crap, I don't need to look to anything else. I can find all my answers internally in the experiences that are around me.
And that's what, look at this. Look what I have in my notes, what you just said. I have internal subjective experiences.
That's what it is.
Yes.
And here's an important aspect, and I think we should close on this with what Israel Regardi said, is that your experiences, nobody can say that they're false or they didn't happen, because it is your experience. It's not for someone else to come in and judge or take that action of observation internally away from you.
I like that. Yes.
It is your own truth through your experience for you to learn and integrate with. And no one can say you didn't have that experience, because if you did, and it's something that is affecting you, it'd be impossible for anyone else to judge and say it never really did occur. Because then they just start saying, well, I'm just going to put my belief on it, and I'm going to take that experience away from you. I'm going to say that's a false experience because my God or my religion
or the devil made me do it.
Or the devil made me do it. You know, like all of these
self-denial.
Again, passing off that responsibility. But he's a key proponent. Be like, take those experiences, learn from them, and understand in your own critical thought, be your own scientific tool.
And regardless of all these books that we talk about, all these people that we bring up, all this history, and closing this, Alex, last statements, we have to understand these people are not gods. Do not look up to a person. It is not and I wrote it down here, I want to make sure I get it right. It's not the knower or the known.
No, because that's the hierarchy. And the second you put someone on a pedestal and you raise them above you, you're going against what creation is saying. And that's perfect equality. It's perfect fairness. And to change that dynamic and to give up your free will, which creation gives you to make that choice, you're punching a hurricane and you're going to lose every single time.
Every time.
Yeah. And just remember, all is one.
All is one. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Jason.